Hello, everyone, and welcome.
All right, good afternoon. I'm sorry, Percy, did you have more you want to say? Okay. Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. It's really great to see you here. Thank you for joining us and welcome to the WSU Community Engagement Institute's Rising to the Challenge workshop series. My name is Joyce McEwen Crane, and I work in organizational and strategic development here at the Institute. I'm joined today by your facilitators, Percy Turner and Jason Bosch, who, like our presenters last week, are back by popular demand. We're also joined by our colleague, Mary Montgomery, who will be helping me run things behind the scenes for this webinar today. So if you have any technical issues or questions, please feel free to send something in the chat, or you can email us through the original email for this webinar. The purpose of the Community Engagement Institute at Wichita State University is to collaborate with our partners to facilitate learning, develop innovative solutions, promote equity, and build capacity to create real change. Our ultimate hope is to see vibrant communities and dynamic organizations that are supported, connected, and effective in making progress. So you're in the third workshop of our 6-part workshop series. And this session is about a timely and much requested topic on navigating conflict and difficult conversations. We've been really excited by the response to this workshop in particular, and we're really incredibly thankful for your support, both to our long-term friends who we're seeing some of your names show up in our participant list, and then to those of you who are new to us, and hopefully some new friends and partners in this work moving forward. So right now I'm going to talk briefly about just the purpose of our workshop series. I'll give you a few Zoom housekeeping tips, and then I'll hand it over to the facilitators for today. So given that we only have an hour, we'll probably be moving fairly quickly through our topic. We have lots to cover, but rest assured we'll share the slides with you. And if you'll give us a couple of weeks, we'll get the slides and the recording for this talk out to you. So you should expect to receive a follow-up email from us with that information. So this series is about how we rise together in the face of challenges. And we at CEI want you to know that we're here as a resource to you and as an interested community partner at all times, but especially in times when you and your teams may need extra support and help with sense making. Our hope here today is to learn from each other, to challenge some of our assumptions and habits around how we do or sometimes don't navigate conflict effectively in our programs, and to connect with one another. And so to do this in comfort, let me remind you of a few housekeeping tips related to Zoom. And I'm sure you all know all of these things, but just as the reminder, with a group this size, we'll have everyone on mute for now in this big room. But when you get into, I do think we have some breakout rooms as part of our learning together today. And then if there's any time when the presenters ask you to unmute, please feel free to do it at that time. And throughout the conversation, I believe chat is enabled for you to make comments, share your ideas, and offer perspectives. And if at any time the chat becomes cumbersome for you or too distracting, please feel free to turn that off. Please keep your video cameras on as much as you can. It really does bring more energy and helps us feel more connected to you as we're doing the presentation. And if you can't, we also understand that. If you wouldn't mind renaming yourself if what's on your screen does not show the name you prefer to use, then you can hover over your own screen, see 3 dots in the upper right-hand corner, and if you click that, it gives you the option of renaming yourself. And then we are recording today, as I said earlier, and so you will be able to watch the session later if you choose to. As I said earlier, Percy and Jason are your facilitators for today. They'll have a great conversation with you and hopefully lots of great learning. So I'll hand things over to Percy to get our talk started.
Thanks, Joyce. I really appreciate the introduction there. I'm going to spend just a small amount of time, and this is out of character for me, talking about just how fantastic I am. And then I'm going to give Jason the same ability to do so. So I am Percy Turner. I am a licensed master's social worker. I graduated from WSU. I work for the Community Engagement Institute. I do some learning and development work, and Jason and I have presented together on numerous occasions. We've also presented on a plethora of other topics, but this is by far one of my favorite talks to have. And we're going to get into why as we dive a little bit deeper into what we have for you today. But I definitely want to give Jason some time to talk a little bit about himself and just say, I love the picture so great and I can't pull off a bow tie. So help me in that department, Jason, and tell me a little bit about you and tell everybody a little bit about you.
Thanks, Percy. Hey, everyone. Great to be here with you today. I'm basically here because Percy allows me to be here and just siphon off his greatness. I work at Wichita State in a couple of capacities, primarily in the College of Engineering. But then I also have the opportunity to do some work with the Community Engagement Institute around learning and development and strategic planning. So I'm excited to be here with you today and sharing some ideas with you along with Percy.
Fantastic. Just so if anybody didn't catch that, Jason gave us the ability to rock a bow tie is to be an engineer with a second job. So just be rich twice over, and the bow tie just looks better and better. Let's move into today's work and talk about what we are going to be doing. So let's talk a little bit about conflict. First and foremost, we want to make sure that we are being as healthy as possible around talking about our own limits and talking about conflict. We are not saying here, and none of this training should be giving anybody the impression that they should be haphazardly elevating conflict or elevating any sort of misunderstanding to encourage discomfort or pain. We have limits in terms of our expertise. We've put together some thoughts around conflict and conflict resolution, but we are not experts on you. So whatever you take from this particular talk, just keep in mind that we are going to do the best we can to give you some neutral information, and you'll be kind of adding your own flavor to it. You'll bring your own context and your own needs into this. And that's kind of what makes this a workshop and not a one-way training. So we're not going to tell you how to be you in the face of conflict. We can only give you some guideposts and hope that you're able to kind of add a bit of your personality to this that really makes it yours. So again, we want to make sure that we're talking about elevating conflict to encourage progress, right? Conflict in many situations can be a healthy tool to push things forward. And in some cases, it's actually kind of a necessary thing. And so that's what we're talking about. We want this information to be used with restraint and looked at alongside the context of person, safety, and situation. We're not trying to talk about dealing with physical conflict or violence. We are going to be talking about leaning into conflict as a concept and giving advice around that, but we are not endorsing instigation. We really want this to be about resolving conflict in a peaceful and productive way. So just want to make sure before we begin, we take the ability for you to sue us out of the equation by explaining just how safe we want everybody to be around conflict resolution. So we're going to do this in 3 different steps, and I believe that should be on our next slide. So let's move forward just a little bit. We're going to be talking about this in 3 stages. We're going to talk about framing, and Jason's going to do a fantastic job of setting us up in terms of how we think about difficult conversations and conflict. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about how we may prepare ourselves for difficult conversation and conflict. And then Jason's going to bring us home and talk about when we are actually showing up. What are some things that happen when the rubber hits the road? And we will kind of go from there. So I'm going to pass this over to Jason, and Jason's going to start us off with understanding how to frame difficult conversations. Jason?
Yeah, thanks, Percy. So we want to start by asking you to think about how you think about and talk about conflict. And so we're going to start with this idea of inviting you to maybe reframe how you think about conflict, how you talk about conflict before we jump into figuring out how do we navigate through and work through and resolve it. So in a moment here, I'm gonna flash an image on the screen. And when you see this image come across your screen, I'm gonna invite you to just share whatever reactions you have in the chat. So words or short phrases that come to mind for you when you see this word that's going to appear on your screen, okay? So get your chat box ready, get your fingers on your keyboards there. And Mary, do you want to go ahead and move us forward? Words or phrases that come to mind for you when you see this word. Thanks for starting us off there, Matt. I imagine there's going to be a lot of stuff coming into the chat here, so I probably won't be able to read them all, but let's look at some highlights here. We've got pain, anger, misunderstanding, uncomfortable, differing viewpoints, yelling, arguing, tension, disagreement, avoid, tension, meeting point, stress, disagreement, difficult conversation. Starting to see some patterns here. Tension. Kathy says necessary. Sadness, disagreement, uncomfortable, riff, uneasiness, run, run the other direction, or fight. Disequilibrium, uncompromising, stress, yikes. 15 points. Thanks, Chad. Chad's looking for some Scrabble points here. Tense, win-lose situation. Samantha says growth, upset, conference, avoid. Yeah, so definitely some hurt feelings, absolutely. Right, so there's some clear patterns here. There's a lot of words that kind of evoke feelings and emotions of the stress and uncomfortability that we can experience just by seeing this word on the screen. And a few folks suggested some ideas or reactions that maybe conflict isn't or doesn't necessarily have to be a bad thing. Mary, you want to take us to the next screen? So I think a lot of what we saw in the chat feels natural. It's kind of our instinctual fight or flight response when we're faced with these uncomfortable situations with other people. And so if we kind of take our attention to the left-hand side of this slide, I think this pretty well resonates with what you all just shared in the chat. This is how we tend to think about or frame conflict. And I took this definition from dictionary.com. I thought it was a very evocative definition that again aligns with what you all just shared in the chat. So dictionary.com defines conflict as a fight, battle, or struggle, especially a prolonged struggle, strife, controversy, and quarrel. And when we think about and talk about conflict in that way, we tend to see it as something that is confrontational, something that is risky and or scary, something that can feel threatening to us, something that can actually be damaging to our relationships. And as someone said in the chat, it often causes us to frame situations as a win-loss proposition, right? If I'm going to engage in this conflict with you, somebody has to come out the winner and somebody has to come out the loser. And we're going to invite you to experiment today with reframing how we think about conflict. And I really like this definition from Amy Gallo, who's a conflict expert. And the way she frames conflict, I think, is beautiful and helps us to perhaps approach difficult conversations in a different way. And she defines it as simply as a situation where two or more people have needs, interests, or goals that are interfering with each other. And if we're willing to consider that framing of conflict, it opens us up to think about conflict differently. We can think about conflict as an opportunity to see where those interferences are happening and close those gaps. Maybe something that's even necessary for us to make progress on issues that matter to us. Something that can be used purposefully in helping us to make progress. And as opposed to damaging relationships, if done well, conflict can actually help us to build relationships. And rather than viewing conflict as a win-lose proposition, we can reframe conflict and think about it as something that helps us all to learn and grow. Next slide, please. So I want to take just those first two bullet points that we looked at on how we reframe conflict, thinking about conflict as opportunity and thinking about conflict as a necessary activity. In a moment, we're going to send you off into some breakout rooms. You should be in a room with 3 to 4 other people. And we're going to give you about 7 minutes in your breakout groups to discuss these 2 questions. So if we're willing to consider conflict as an opportunity, the question is, what is possible if we lean into conflict or difficult conversations? And if we reframe conflict as a necessary activity, then what is at risk if we do not lean into conflict or we avoid difficult conversations? So you'll have about 7 minutes in your breakouts to talk about those 2 questions. You might consider spending about 3 to 3.5 minutes on each question, and then we'll come back together and see what you talked about. And if we are ready for breakout rooms, we can go ahead and send people off now. And we will see you in 7 minutes. You might have to click the little join button in the center of your screen there. Hi, Jenny. Welcome to the session. We have folks in breakout rooms right now discussing the questions that you might see on your screen there, and they'll be back with us in about 2 minutes.
Just to let you know, we have about 30 seconds left. Welcome back, everyone. We're going to sit tight for just a few seconds until all of our breakout rooms have closed. Okay, I think we are all back. Welcome back. I hope you had some good and insightful conversations. We don't have time for me to hear from all of the groups, but I would like to take a minute and have a few folks share with us in the chat some ideas you discussed in your breakout room around these questions. So what's possible if we lean into conflict? And what might be at risk if we do not lean into conflict? Love to hear from a few folks in the chat. Okay, guys, getting us started off here. Change, if we lean into, no change if we do not. Trust, growth, discovery, and progress. When you lean into conflict, your intent makes a difference. All right, we've got lots of ideas coming in here. Lean in, excuse me, lean in. What's possible is resolution, curiosity. We don't lean into it, we risk burning bridges that we may need in the future. Person who is most opposed to your current effort may be your biggest supporter in a future effort. We lean into it, we can get different perspectives, possibility of normalizing it as a tool for growth. I like that, Sarah. Lean in, progress. Processing emotions so it does not impact relationships with the person and others we are communicating with about the situation. Yeah, thank you for those thoughts. So just going to encourage you to kind of hold this idea, this framing of conflict as a necessary, purposeful, useful relationship building and learning and growth oriented activity through the rest of our session today. One last piece I want to invite you to think about before we really get into the addressing and navigating conflict piece. We really want this workshop to be useful for you in some context of your life. So I'm going to invite you to take a few moments here to think about a situation for you that is real and present in your life that could benefit from a difficult conversation. Mary, if you want to move us forward a slide, that'd be great. Okay, so 4 minutes. think about a situation in your life, again, that might benefit from a difficult conversation. And you can think about this. You can jot down some notes if you wish. We're not going to ask you to share out loud or in the chat, but I'm going to invite you to identify a situation that we can continue to come back to throughout the rest of this workshop. So I'm going to be quiet now for 4 minutes and let you think about a situation in your life, and maybe think about who are the key players in this situation and what's really the crux of the conflict. What's at the heart of this conflict that might need a difficult conversation? We'll take about 1 more minute and then we'll keep moving along. Okay, I'm gonna invite you to just hold on to that situation that you thought about. At the end of this session, we're gonna come back to it and we're gonna ask you to think about some strategies that we're going to go over now and how you might apply those to your particular situation. So hold on to that situation. I'm gonna pass it back over to Percy to talk us through how we prepare for difficult conversations.
Thanks so much. So one of the things that I want to do really quickly before I even get started is shout out my group. You guys were fantastic. And one of the things that was said as we move on to our next slide was curiosity. And I saw it in the chat as well. Curiosity is the key to preparing for difficult conversations. And so these are the areas and the domains that we can find ourselves being curious about. We can be curious about our situation, ourselves, and the other person or the other side of the story, whether that's a group or a person. Now, as we move into this, I'm going to give the caveat that honesty is the best policy here. So when we ask you to get curious about something, it's not a surface level curiosity. We're talking about digging into our motivations. We're talking about perhaps having a difficult conversation with ourselves in order to properly prepare us for an honest conversation that we actually want to have. So we're going to talk first about the situation or issue. So on our next slide, it's going to really ask a couple questions around this. Now, Jason and I spent quite a lot of time thinking about all of the questions that you could ask yourself to get yourself curious and to feed that curiosity. We came up with these few. There's going to be 4 for each one of our areas here. So describing the issue as you understand it. And that's another major, huge point of curiosity. We are only limited by our understanding. So what contributed to the development of this issue? What's at stake? What are options for making progress? And what would be an ideal outcome? Now, these things are all great points of prep before you even enter in so that you understand where you're coming from. But again, honesty is the best policy. And there's no place where honesty is the most effective and the most difficult than our second element that we're going to go to on our next slide, which is yourself, right? Your purpose in the conversation. To answer the question that just came up in chat, I believe we will be able to share slides with folks, and I'm sure that Mary or Joyce can be a little bit more specific here. It looks like Joyce is on it. So getting clear about your purpose. How have I contributed to the issue at hand? Where am I willing to compromise? What assumptions am I making? This is my very favorite question because there are so many ways that assumptions take form in our thoughts, and they don't feel like assumptions if we're thinking them ourselves. They feel like the truth. Something earlier in chat that said that a risk of engaging and leaning in is exposing truths. And I think that this is a fantastic way for you to do that, even toward yourself, to learn about what assumptions you may be making. And then last but not least, how is it that you want to show up? What role are you assuming? Are you a mediator here? Are you part of a larger faction? Are you a supervisor? Are you a supervisee? Where are you at in this conversation, and being very mindful of that? Last but not least, we're going to be getting curious about the other in our situation. So that's on our next slide. We're going to be talking more about kind of the other people or group. What matters most to them, do you believe? What are common concerns? What are some questions that we can ask to learn more about them? What can we say or do to establish a shared purpose? All of these things are fantastic elements of kind of planning and preparing. I saw something in chat that was a fantastic question about surprise conflict. I wish that we lived in a world where we could like just pause, right? Conflict comes up, we just kind of hit the button, everybody freezes, and we get ourselves together, and then we get into, or we're able to lean into a conversation. Part of being curious about yourself is knowing how you react under certain pressures, right? So it is very possible, and it's completely okay to talk a little bit about asking for time. And this is exactly what Jazz is literally in my head right now. Asking for time, being courteous about saying, I really am interested in having this conversation, and I think that I need some time to get myself together around this. Giving some sort of a preliminary understanding. I hear you saying this. Here's my preliminary understanding of this situation, and I'd love some time to kind of really collect and have an honest and open conversation about what's happening. So yeah, but the big thing here about the other people, common concerns, shared purpose, and learning. A lot of reconceptualizing conflict is moving conflict away from a winner take all sort of situation and recognizing that learning is more important than winning. And so in order to do that, we have to be curious about what the other people who are involved in this are either going through, thinking, or what their results may be and what progress may look like for them. So having all of that said, preparation is just paramount. And again, I recognize that there is not always going to be a nice, happy, easy time where okay, I have a conflict conversation coming up in the next 2 days. So I have 2 days to do my training montage and get myself ready for this conversation. That's not always the case, right? The other thing that I wanted to make sure that I addressed here is conflict when it comes to recognizing power levels. So that's going to be on our next slide. And we're going to talk just briefly about how it feels and what we can be doing if we're dealing with conversational conflict between people with different power and authority status. We're going to, again, focus on shared goals. So if I have, for example, a difficult conversation coming up with my supervisor, or just like with Joyce, I'm scared to death of Joyce. I don't know if anybody knows. If you've worked with me, if you know me, I am petrified of Joyce. So if Joyce and I were going to have a difficult conversation, I want to focus on my shared goal. I want to focus on, see, Ron knows. I want to focus on addressing things like counter narrative and varying interpretation. So this is also a great, if something comes to you in the moment and you have to talk about it in the moment, here's some things to keep in your mind. Focusing on a shared goal, talking about and addressing counter narratives, helping define how success from your perspective might look or feel. Naming systemic obstacles is also a big deal, talking not only about ourselves and our feelings, but the way that the system that we exist in may be adding to or taking away from progress. Articulating our boundaries. Listen, Joyce, I have 10 minutes to talk about this, and I really need your help in this time that we have together. And maybe we can take a break and talk about it in a week or so. I'm just kidding. I love Joyce very much. I'm really not scared of Joyce. She's looking at me. Listen, I might need your help. The last but not least, bringing a trusted peer for support, right? Having, especially if you're part of a group, it is very, very important to make sure that there's representation from everybody. It doesn't feel great to be penned into a situation where you represent a body of people or a system that's bigger than you. So being able to invite more of that system in to have a conversation that kind of touches on multiple perspectives may really, really be helpful to you. So this is not only something that's talking about things with power differentials, but I think that these things are also valuable in that surprise conflict scenario that was brought up in chat earlier. So we're just going to kind of go back over what we've talked about, and we're going to prepare for a small bit of breaking up into your breakout rooms. We're going to head back there. So on our next slide, it's a quick review. We'll do that quick review, and then we'll toss you in breakout rooms so you can take what you got from that 4 minutes that you spent with Jason, really understanding something that would benefit from a conflictual conversation or a difficult conversation. And what I want you to do is look at this slide and really think about what arena needs the most thought, what needs the most attention. Do we need to really be looking into ourselves? Do we really need to be looking into what the issue is? Do we really need to be dissecting and digging into the other players in our conversation? So take what you thought of when you were talking with Jason at the tail end, really think about the elements of that situation. And I don't necessarily want you to disclose anything that you're not comfortable with disclosing around that specific conversation, but just talk about the benefits of paying special attention to being curious about yourself, being curious about the issue, and being curious about the other participants in a potentially difficult conversation. We're going to give you 7 minutes. And in that 7 minutes, you'll be able to kind of share. We suggest you take 3 to 3.5 minutes or probably 2 minutes for each if you want to talk about all three, but just kind of take your time and really dig into which of these needs the most attention. And so we're going to go ahead and toss this in the chat. Which needs the most attention? Being curious about the issue, being curious about yourself, being curious about others. And then we'll toss you into the breakout rooms and we'll see you in about 7 minutes.
Angela, hi. We're in breakout rooms right now, so we'll be back in like 5.5 minutes.
Sounds good, Joyce. Thank you.
You're welcome. And Jason, and Percy, I'm gonna log out because I'm getting weird lines through my Zoom thing and losing functioning, so I'll log back in here in a second. Hopefully I don't do anything damaging to this.
Hi, Jason.
Hi, Angela. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Pretty good.
Glad to hear it.
Can you see us better now, Joyce?
Yeah, I'm not the only one that's been having a lot of difficulty on Zoom where slowly you start to lose functioning and almost always the audio stays, but things start to go weird on the slides. And then I can't end, I can't unmute, all this stuff. I can't get in the chat anymore. And so one by one, things start to disappear. But if you just click Control-Alt-Delete and use the task manager to stop Zoom, you come right back into the session. It's very strange.
Good to know.
But I learned that the other day when I was presenting. One reason why it's good to have another host
Yes.
on the call. But evidently it's a Zoom bug that I don't know, maybe they haven't figured out how to fix yet.
Welcome, Jill. We have everyone in breakouts right now, but they'll be rejoining us shortly.
Well, we are back. It looks like we are running a little bit short on time. So what I'd like to invite you to do is take some of the important elements that you've spoke about in your groups and share them in the chat. And I am going to quickly pass the baton back over to Jason to lead us home like a country road and talk about showing up.
Thanks, Percy. So I'm going to jump right in, and we're going to give you a lot of different strategies that you might use for showing up to the conversation. So we've framed conflict. Percy helped us prepare for it. The moment has arrived. We're having this difficult conversation. Here are some things we can do to hopefully make it be productive and useful. Some of these things here might be new things to you, new strategies, and some of them might be things that you know. And today's just a really good reminder of some of those things that you learned previously. So again, going to go through this quickly. This is not an exhaustive list of all the things that you might do. They're just some that Percy and I selected that we thought were useful. 1, set a time limit for the conversation. Going back to that idea of boundaries that Percy talked about earlier. Percy asked us to think about purpose before we show up to the conversation. And we think it can be useful to, right before that conversation begins, reconnect with that sense of purpose. Why are you having this conversation? What are you hoping comes out of it? And equally important, reconnect with how you want to show up. Remind yourself of how you want to show up in this space, in this conversation with this other person or persons. Percy talked about the importance of curiosity, and that connects with this idea of adopting a mindset of inquiry and going into this conversation to learn. Use inviting language. Percy said this earlier. I could really use your help with this challenge that I'm facing. We asked you to think about purpose and reconnect with it. We also would ask you to think about articulating that purpose. Share that purpose with the other person or persons and come back to that purpose during difficult moments in the conversation. Focus on what you're hearing, not what you're saying, and don't interrupt and check for understanding. So let's give you a few more strategies you might consider. Take us to the next slide. Thank you very much. Pay attention to posture, tone, facial expression. We probably all know that sometimes it's not just what you say, it's how you say it. So being aware of your nonverbal communication is equally important. Allow yourself to be vulnerable. I do want to make a note around this idea of vulnerability. And many of these strategies that we're giving you today, depending on the identities and or privileges that you hold, some of these strategies may feel more available to you, and some of them may feel riskier to you. So we do want to acknowledge that identity and privilege can certainly play a role in how we navigate conflict. Confront behavior instead of making judgments about character. Use I statements. When I hear you say, I think or I feel, it impacts me in this way. And or you can use we statements. So we statements invite partnership between you and the other person or persons. Shift toward making agreements with the intention of moving forward, and go into it expecting a positive outcome. You may not fully resolve the situation, but go into it with a positive mindset. And a few more strategies we want to give you that connect back to that question that Samantha raised earlier of what happens if I don't have time to sit down and prepare for a conversation? It just happens in the moment, and here I am faced with a conflictual situation. In those moments, a few strategies are to start with observing your own default reaction. So that sense of how am I reacting in this moment, get really aware of that, and then try to slow everything down. Your breathing, your thinking, the conversation. Connect with a reason why you value the other person. Allow some space for uncomfortable moments of silence. It's oftentimes in these moments that we have that space to just process, to just think and process what's happening. So silence can be a really helpful tool. And as somebody I think suggested earlier, sometimes you just have to say, now's not the right time to have this conversation, and ask for another time in the future when you can come back and revisit. So those are just a few of the many possible strategies that you might use to show up to conflict. I'm going to pass it back over to Percy, and he's going to kind of help us wrap this all together.
Okay, so what we're going to ask you to do is call that looming thing that you may need to be having a difficult conversation around or a conflictual conversation around, and think about all the things that we've talked about today. We've talked about how you think about thinking about conflict. We've talked about how you prepare for conflict. We've talked about how you may show up for conflict. We've talked about curiosity. We've talked about holding to purpose. So what are some tactics that you are committed to practicing? Now, we're going to have much less time this time. We're going to give about 4 minutes, if I remember correctly, with a 1 minute buffer that we've always kind of given you. You'll kind of get that 1 minute warning, and that will bring us right to the end of our time. So tell us, we're going to go ahead and put you in these groups now. 2 tactics that you're committed to practicing. Talk it over with the folks in your group, and then come back and we'll give you some ability to contact us, and then we'll let you back out into the world.
Jason, I asked Mary if she would go ahead and put the link for the survey in just as soon as everybody gets back, because we're going to be running right up to the hour, and I want to make sure people get the link.
Well, everybody, we are at our time boundary. If you'll look down over to the chat, if you'll open the chat really quick, Mary has done the service of putting the survey link in the chat. The survey is just a place for you to shower us with praises. Tell us how fantastic we are, because I need that ego boost at the end of this long Monday after the holiday. No, please, the giving honest feedback in the survey really helps us mold this challenge to be something that is in service to the community. And that is our goal here. So however you would like to share your opinion, what's important is that you share it with us and you share it with us in the same honest and curious nature we're suggesting you deal with conflict. I promise you, I will not have a conflict with you. If you say something bad about me, but I can't promise for Jason. His beard is much more aggressive than mine. Thank you very, very much for spending your time with us today, and check out that survey and have a fantastic afternoon.